In 1995, the quiet English town of Westbourne had grown used to the steady rhythm of ordinary life. Rows of brick houses stood in silence, their curtains drawn against the cold nights, their gardens neatly trimmed. The people who lived there trusted one another, greeted each other by name, and felt protected by the familiarity of their routines. That was why when Dr. Henry Caldwell opened his private practice on the corner of Hawthorne Street, he was welcomed without hesitation. He was a doctor, a man who healed, who cared, who wore a white coat and carried with him the promise of safety. No one could have guessed that behind his calm voice and reassuring smile, he carried dark intentions. But before we dive into the full part of the story, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also follow for more interesting stories to come. The first time Margaret Clark visited him, she remembered thinking how comforting he seemed. His office smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender, his walls lined with framed degrees, his tone warm but authoritative. "You're in safe hands," he told her when she complained of chest pains. She believed him, as did everyone else. But what she couldn't have known was that his hands, steady and practiced, had already taken lives instead of saving them. If you enjoy stories where the people meant to protect us hide the darkest secrets, then this tale will grip you from the very start. Because Dr. Caldwell's story is not about healing. It's about control, deception, and the thin line between care and cruelty. By spring of that year, whispers began to spread. An elderly man named Walter Briggs had died after a routine consultation with Caldwell. It was explained away as a heart attack, nothing unusual for a man of his age. The death certificate bore Caldwell's signature. Soon after, another patient, this time a middle-aged woman with nothing more serious than migraines, collapsed unexpectedly at home after an appointment. Her husband recalled that she had felt strange after taking prescription Caldwell provided, but no one questioned the doctor's judgment. Who would they? For months, the town remained blind. Caldwell was seen as respectable, even generous. He donated to the local church, sponsored the youth football team, and never failed to ask about his patients' families. But in the shadows of his office, something sinister was unfolding. His treatment plans often included medications in doses higher than necessary, sometimes mixed with sedatives that left patients weakened and confused. For those most vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, and those who trusted him completely, the consequences were fatal. Emily Hughes, a nurse who occasionally assisted Caldwell, was the first to suspect something was wrong. She noticed his records didn't always match the prescriptions. Sometimes patients who were recovering suddenly took a turn for the worse after visiting him. She mentioned her concerns to him once, lightly, as if to mask her suspicion. He responded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're still young in the profession," he said. "You'll learn that medicine is rarely straightforward. People die, and it's not always something we can control." His tone was gentle, but Emily felt a chill run down her spine. By late 1996, the number of sudden deaths linked to Caldwell's patients had grown too obvious to ignore. Yet still, no one confronted him directly. Families grieved quietly, grateful for his kind words at funerals, never realizing that the man who offered them condolences was the same one responsible for their loss. Caldwell had perfected the art of invisibility, killing in plain sight under the mask of medical authority. But then came the case that would unravel everything. A boy of 12, Daniel Harper, had visited Caldwell for a minor respiratory infection. He was given medication that his mother swore looked different from anything they'd received before. Within hours of taking it, Daniel fell violently ill, convulsing until his small body gave out. His death devastated the community, sparking questions that could no longer be silenced. Why had a healthy child died from something so treatable? Why had Caldwell dismissed the mother's concerns with a curt, Sometimes the body reacts unexpectedly. Emily Hughes could no longer hold back. She began documenting what she saw. Every strange dosage, every patient who left looking worse than when they had arrived. She compared notes, and the pattern became undeniable. Caldwell wasn't negligent. He was deliberate. He was choosing who lived and who died. The thought was monstrous, but once planted in her mind, it grew with horrifying clarity. She remembered the odd gleam in his eye when discussing terminal patients, the way he lingered too long when listening to their hearts, the satisfaction that seemed to flicker across his face when death was pronounced. Emily realized that Caldwell's role as a doctor wasn't about saving people at all. It was about power. By 1997, whispers had turned into quiet investigations. A coroner raised an eyebrow over inconsistencies in toxicology reports. Another physician, reviewing Caldwell's files during a routine audit, noticed errors that felt too consistent to be accidents. Still, no one wanted to accuse him outright. The town couldn't reconcile the image of the trusted doctor with the possibility that he might be a killer. Then Caldwell made his first mistake. One evening, when writing prescription, he miscalculated the dosage, leaving a clear paper trail that contradicted his notes. Emily, now secretly keeping copies of his files, had proof that he had intentionally written lethal dosages, proof that could end his reign of deception. But what she didn't realize was that Caldwell had begun to notice her watching him. He could see the doubt in her eyes, the hesitation in her movements. And if there was one thing Caldwell couldn't allow, it was exposure. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game between the nurse who sought justice and the doctor who had built his life on secrets. As the deaths mounted and suspicion closed in, Westbourne would learn the terrible truth about the man they had trusted the most. But by then, it would already be too late for many, because Dr. Henry Caldwell had no intention of stopping. For him, medicine had never been about saving lives. It had always been about taking them. For him, medicine had never been about saving lives. It had always been about taking them. Emily Hughes stared at the stack of copied prescriptions hidden beneath the loose floorboard of her bedroom. Each paper carried a weight that pressed against her chest, making it harder to breathe at night. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that someone had to see the truth, but fear gnawed at her. Caldwell wasn't just a doctor. He was respected, protected by his reputation, by the trust of an entire town. If she accused him and failed to prove it, her career would be destroyed. Worse, she might end up like his patients, another unexplained death that no one dared question. Her hands trembled as she slipped the latest record into the pile. The dosage was lethal, the intent unmistakable. Caldwell was careful, but not perfect, and she had caught him slipping. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. It meant she had leverage. It also meant he might know she had it. At the practice, she began to notice the way his eyes lingered on her just a moment too long, as if searching her expression for signs of betrayal. His question seemed harmless. "Are you all right, Emily? You've been quiet lately," but his tone carried something sharper underneath. A warning. One night, as she locked up after hours, she heard footsteps behind her. The sound was deliberate, heavy, echoing across the dark street. She turned sharply, but the pavement stretched empty. Still, her instinct screamed. She quickened her pace, fumbling with her car keys, her breath fogging in the cold air. The footsteps didn't return, but the message was clear. She was being watched. Meanwhile, the town was shifting. The death of young Daniel Harper had planted seeds of suspicion among the locals. Mothers whispered to each other in hushed tones, wondering they could still trust a man who had stood over Daniel's coffin and assured them it was a tragedy of chance. Some patients began requesting referrals to other doctors, though many remained loyal, unwilling to believe it was the man who had cared for them for years. Caldwell noticed a wavering trust, and it made him restless. For the first time, his mask was cracking. Late in the autumn of 1997, a quiet inquiry began. Detective Inspector Sarah Morton, a methodical woman with sharp instincts, had been assigned to review complaints about inconsistencies in Caldwell's medical reports. Officially, it wasn't yet a criminal case. Unofficially, Morton smelled rot beneath the polished surface. She requested copies of death certificates, prescription histories, and toxicology reports. It was slow, painstaking work. Caldwell had covered his tracks well, but the numbers spoke louder than he realized. Morton's interest in the case soon reached Emily. At first, Emily hesitated to involve herself. Fear still gripped her throat. But then she thought of Daniel Harper's mother, sobbing at the boy's funeral. She thought of the old men and women who had trusted Caldwell with their last days, never knowing he was hastening the end. Emily decided she could not stay silent. She arranged a meeting with Morton at a small cafe outside town, where no one would recognize her. The detective listened intently as Emily laid out her copies of records, her notes, her suspicions. Morton said little at first, her eyes scanning the papers with a growing gravity. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. "You understand what you're accusing him of?" Morton asked. Emily nodded, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "His killing them, his choosing people and ending their lives under the guise of treatment. And if I don't say something, he'll keep going." Morton leaned closer. "If you're right, this is bigger than malpractice. This is murder. But I'll need more than suspicion and paperwork. I'll need something that ties him directly to an act, something irrefutable." Emily left the meeting with both relief and dread. She wasn't alone anymore, but the risk had doubled. Caldwell's gaze followed her more intensely now, as though he sensed she was slipping from his grasp. It was during this fragile period that Caldwell decided to test her. One afternoon, he handed her a vial of medication and asked her to administer it to an elderly patient named Agnes Turner, who had come in complaining of fatigue. Emily glanced at the label and felt her stomach tighten. The dosage was far too high, deadly, even. She hesitated, her fingers cold around the glass. "Something wrong?" Caldwell asked, watching her closely. Emily forced a smile, masking her panic. "No, doctor. Just double-checking." When Caldwell left the room, she slipped the vial into her pocket and substituted a safe dose from the cabinet. Agnes left the clinic later that day smiling, alive, oblivious to the fact that death had been intended for her. Emily sat in her car afterward, the vial heavy in her hand. She realized she had something monumental, physical evidence. That night, she met Morton again, passing the vial wrapped in a handkerchief. The detective's eyes sharpened as she studied it. This could be exactly what we need. But Caldwell was not blind. The next morning, his demeanor toward Emily changed. The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a cold civility that chilled her to the bone. He no longer asked her casual questions. He watched her every move. She felt trapped in the same building as him, each moment of the practice like standing on a thin sheet of ice, waiting for it to crack. Then the first warning came. A letter slipped under her apartment door, unsigned. The message was short, scrawled in block letters. "Silence is safer." Emily's hands shook as she read it. She wanted to run, to leave town and disappear, but another part of her hardened with resolve. If she fled, Caldwell would win. He would go on killing, protected by silence. She couldn't allow that. Detective Morton, now fully invested in the case, urged her to be careful. "It is dangerous, Emily. If he suspects you're working with us, he won't hesitate." Emily swallowed hard. He already suspects. The investigation deepened. Morton quietly ordered exhumations of 2 of Caldwell's former patients. The toxicology results came back with traces of sedatives and unprescribed substances. It was enough to confirm foul play, but Morton wanted more before moving in. Caldwell was clever. He would fight every charge with the armor of his medical expertise. One evening, as winter crept into Westbourne, Emily left the clinic later than usual. The streets were deserted, a biting wind whipping through the narrow lanes. She reached her car, unlocked it, and slid into the driver's seat. As she reached for the ignition, she froze. In the rear view mirror, a figure sat in the back seat, cloaked in darkness. Her breath caught in her throat. Then Caldwell's calm voice broke the silence. "We need to talk, Emily." The sound of his voice in confined darkness of the car was like ice sliding down her spine. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, forcing herself not to flinch. In the mirror, she could barely see his face, just a pale outline of his eyes catching the dim glow from the streetlight outside. "Dr. Caldwell," she managed, her voice thin but steady. "You scared me." "That wasn't my intention." His tone was calm, deliberate, like the way he spoke to patients right before easing a needle into their vein. "I only want to understand why you've been distant, distracted, different." Emily's heart thudded against her ribs. Every instinct screamed to run, to throw open the door and escape, but she forced herself to remain still. If she showed fear, he'd know. If she lied poorly, he'd know. Caldwell was a predator, and predators smelled weakness. "You've been under stress," he continued softly, leaning forward just enough for her to catch the glint of his glasses. "I can see it. This job, it can weigh heavily. Sometimes, the burden of life and death is too much for young people in our profession." Emily swallowed, her throat dry. "Maybe, but I'm fine." Silence stretched between them. Then Caldwell chuckled, low and humorless. "Fine. Such a useless word, don't you think? Everyone says it before they break." Her hand inched toward the door handle, but his voice froze her again. "Don't. If you step out of this car, we'll have a problem. And I don't think you want problems with me, Emily." For the first time, his mask slipped entirely. His voice carried no warmth, no pretense. It was cold, sharp, filled with the arrogance of a man who had chosen life and death for years without consequence. "You've been asking questions," he said, "looking too closely. That makes me uncomfortable. And when people make me uncomfortable, well, you've seen what happens." Emily's pulse hammered in her ears. He knew, maybe not everything, but enough. The floorboard full of copies, the vial she had given Detective Martin, those secrets were no longer safe. He was warning her in his own way, offering her a chance to back down. But she couldn't. "You've killed them," she whispered before she could stop herself. The words trembled out of her, but once spoken, they filled the car like a confession. Caldwell leaned back in the seat, exhaling slowly as if savoring the moment. Such a harsh word. Killed. I would call it mercy. Efficiency. An end to suffering that would come sooner or later anyway. I decide when the pain stops. That's not cruelty, Emily. That's power. And it's mine. Her stomach turned, but she kept her eyes fixed forward. "You're not God." "No," he murmured, almost amused. "But I'm close enough." The air in the car grew suffocating. Emily knew she couldn't sit there much longer. She forced her fingers to move, inching toward her phone in her coat pocket. But before she could reach it, Caldwell leaned forward suddenly, his hand resting lightly on the back of her seat, close enough for her to smell the faint trace of antiseptic on his skin. "I like you, Emily," he said softly. "You're clever. You see more than most. But curiosity is dangerous. And if you don't stop," his hand tapped once against the leather, sharp, deliberate, "you'll end up like them." Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he slipped out of the car and into the night. By the time Emily spun around, the street was empty, the darkness swallowing him whole. She sat there trembling, too afraid to move, too alive with adrenaline to breathe properly. She knew then there would be no second chance. Caldwell had marked her just as he had marked his patients. The next morning, she went straight to Detective Martin. Her hands shook as she relayed every word of the encounter, her voice cracking when she admitted how close she had come to breaking. Martin listened, her jaw tight. "That's it," Martin said firmly. "We move now. He's circling you, which means he knows we're closing in. We can't give him another chance." The police acted quickly but quietly. A surveillance team shadowed Caldwell's movements, monitoring his practice, his prescriptions, his visits. Within days, they caught him attempting to falsify records for Agnes Turner, the same woman Emily had saved from a lethal injection. The evidence was enough. The arrest happened on a gray morning, the kind where the sky seemed heavy with foreboding. Caldwell was in his office, meticulously writing notes, when the door burst open and uniformed officers flooded the room. He didn't resist, not at first. He simply set down his pen and looked up, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Do you know how many lives I've touched?" he asked as they snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. "How many people begged me for relief, and I gave it to them. You should thank me, not arrest me." Detective Martin stepped forward, her voice steady. "Henry Caldwell, you're under arrest for multiple counts of murder." As they led him away, Caldwell turned his gaze on Emily, who stood silently in the corner, her heart pounding. His smile widened. "You did this," he said softly. His words meant only for her. "Remember that. Every life I could have ended, every mercy denied, they are on you now." His calmness chilled her more than rage ever could. The trial that followed gripped Westbourne. Families who had once praised Caldwell now sat in the courtroom, listening in horror as prosecutors laid out the pattern of deaths, the falsified records, the toxicology reports that spoke louder than words. Emily testified, her voice trembling but clear, holding nothing back. She told the jury about the vial, the false prescriptions, the night in the car. Caldwell never broke. He sat with the same calm smile, as though the outcome didn't matter. But the verdict did. Guilty on all counts. The sentence, life imprisonment, without possibility of release. When the gavel fell, the town let out a collective breath it hadn't realized it was holding. The trusted doctor, the man who had lived among them for years, was unmasked as a predator. Emily left the courthouse that day shaken but resolute. She knew Caldwell's words would haunt her, that twisted claim that his crimes now rested on her shoulders. But she also knew the truth. She had stopped him. She had saved lives by refusing to stay silent. In the years that followed, Westbourne slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. New doctors came, cautious at first, then accepted into the fabric of the community. But a shadow lingered in the corners of every clinic, a reminder that trust could be a weapon, and that sometimes the very people sworn to heal were capable of harm. As for Emily, she moved on, but never forgot. Every patient she helped as a nurse, every life she touched, carried with her the memory of the man who had twisted medicine into murder. And in the solitude of his prison cell, Henry Caldwell continued to smile, certain that even locked away, his legacy would endure, not as a healer, but as a doctor who took lives instead of saving them.